Yeah, so in the 40s, he's still trying to, work through that. Philosophically, he knows what's going on. He looks at it and goes, hey, yeah, I know.
It's in
What?
my book's in the car. It must have slipped off.
All the way out in a car?
I had it.
It's probably in the driveway and people have been driving over it and stuff. We've got a guy that's not been married telling us about sex and marriage. And then he got to put it into practice, yeah. Irving. Pardon?
That's what they used to say about the Catholic priests, too.
Same thing.
About sex and marriage and non-marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, they had to speculate by observation, which,
Some of them didn't, and they got in trouble.
some of them didn't have it out front. Yeah. Yeah.
Those blue-colored glasses I was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes for a interesting perspective. But he's offering some help, and it's kind of a great way to approach things because he's looking at morality and what is going on in the world. This is, World War II time and mid-century, and you're thinking, if in America we look backwards, often look back at the 1950s and go, that's when we had it together. We were the moral bunch. If we'd only be like we were in the 50s. And you go, this guy's talking to him in the 40s. And he's going, we got some problem. And it sounds just like today. And it has always. This is not new. This is the way it's been. So he starts off with that. We must now consider Christian morality as regards sex, what Christians call the virtue of chastity. And he does a good job of separating the chastity and modesty thing, putting one into the social mores of the day versus what it is that God's called us to. And I think he did a great job with putting those things together. What do you guys think? There you go.
Well, and that's when he divides it into modesty or chastity.
Yeah.
Which is which?
Uh-huh. And it makes a difference how we deal with that. In one of his illustrations in this thing was one that I've run into. I had a friend that was part of our ministry in California who was originally, he's British, and his family moved when he was young to South Africa. So and then he moves from South Africa. When he goes to seminary, he moves to the States, goes to Dallas Seminary, and stayed, and he was, I don't know how many doctorate stuff he had. This guy, just lots of stuff. Anyway, we were talking about these things, and he was talking about the differences in the value systems and the conversation of tribal people in South Africa. And he said there's an argument between these two women, these two Christian women, on how they were dressed, and that they were just offended by this woman because her skirt allowed her ankles to be shown. Yeah, it was horrible. They had nothing from the waist up on, but they were deeply concerned. And you go, okay, there's a difference in how those things are viewed in different places, different times, and that's part of what he's dealing with. Is okay. There are some standards that we're used to that we come from some other time, place, and time, and it may be totally different. But chastity is different. So that's faithfulness and being committed to the partner. And that one is a totally different approach to the whole thing. Let's see.
Charity also, being kind to people, the older to the younger and the younger to the older, and just realizing that it's the time you grew up in when it came to modesty, and it's not a question of chastity in that case, it's just be kind to each other.
That would be good.
For the question of, you know, are your ankles showing when everything else is naked?
Yeah, that's right. So, oh my gosh.
Right?
For the benefit of recognizing, yeah, you're right. Just being kind to them and giving them the benefit of the doubt that even though they break your propriety standard, they're not.
Yeah, I like he says either or both could be chaste or not. Either way. Go, okay. Yeah, that makes you think a whole lot, totally different way. I like, this is just funny. I'm not sure this is a great lead, but he's talking about getting a large audience together for a striptease. When he says, just put that plate of mutton out there with a bit of bacon and uncover it. And you go, that's funny. Yeah. The whole starvation thing. And he says, that's not really it. We're just gorged. So we're kind of coming to it from a different perspective.
One of the things that I really like reading here, because it resonates with me, is that, as Tom said, you were raised that you didn't talk about sex. You didn't, I mean, it was taboo to even talk about it. But that's not our natural state. Our natural state is that it is something that is part of what we are, and we don't want to over talk about it or make it a big deal in our lives. But on page 100, he says that someone is also healthy and normal, and that I think goes to our society today. And obviously back then as well, he was feeling it, that in the attempt, I think, of maybe us baby boomers trying to is okay.
Yeah.
And that's not what it is. And I love that the lie consists in.
The lie.
The lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was one I liked.
That's good. Yeah. And many people are deterred from seriously attempting Christian chastity because that's just a natural thing, so let's just turn it loose. You go, no, that's not it. That's not the answer. But coming up with the perfect chastity, and down the page there, ask God for help. Get some, spiritual help. Get some maybe accountability kind of things, but just keep going. And don't beat yourself up. Ask forgiveness, pick yourself up, try again. And the goal is to get to virtue of actually accomplishing this, because that chastity thing is charity. That really is the loving thing to do for our relationship with God, and for creates a society like we have that becomes mean, and jealousies go run amok, and self-control is thrown out the window, and we just create a world where a whole lot of things are starting to fall apart.
Virtue, even attempted virtue, brings light, and indulgence brings fog.
The fog is, that's true. And the more indulgence, the more foggy it gets, yeah. Yeah.
And I like this line where he says, very often what God first helps us towards is not the virtue itself, but just the power of always trying again. And just before that, he said, asking God for his help.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So just like you said, don't lay there and beat yourself up, get up and
Keep going,
Yeah.
because that's the goal. We want to get to that.
get forgiveness and really mean it.
Yeah.
You know, and really repent when you're in the right space then. You know?
Yeah. We got to keep moving in that direction, which is, yeah, the goal. I did mark that one. I thought, isn't that true? There's people just, okay, I really want to do this, but yeah, maybe later. With regard to Jesus' return, it was, I don't know if you guys remember, the late great Planet Earth came out back in the late 60s, and it was like this thing, and Jesus is coming back pretty darn quick. So there's a lot of excitement in the early 70s, and I remember being in some groups, and everybody at that point, were teenagers, and running into the people who are reading that going, yeah, man, he's going to come back. Look, Russia's moving over here, and this thing's happening, and oh my gosh. And then, but I don't want him to come back yet. And there was one big reason. There was, just hold off a little bit. I want you to come back, just not yet.
That was Al Lindsay, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't write that in his book, but that was
Just not right now.
not right now. Yeah, just hold off, Lord. A few other things going on here. Repressed sexuality does not appear to the patient to be sexuality at all. When an adolescent or adult is engaged in resisting a conscious desire, he's not dealing with a repression, nor is he in the least danger of creating a repression. On the contrary, those who are seriously attempting chastity are more conscious and soon know a great deal more about their own sexuality than anyone else. Self-control and discipline and creating a better environment for ourselves and husband, wife, whoever down the road, this just gets better. This is just towards the end of it. Though I speak at length about sex, I want to make it clear, I possibly can't, that, Christian morality is not here. If anyone thinks that Christians regard unchastity as the supreme vice, he's quite wrong. The sins of the flesh are bad, but they are the least bad of all sins. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. The pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing and spoiling sport and backbiting, the pleasures of power, of hatred. For there are two things inside me, competing with the human self, which I must try to become. They are the animal self and the diabolical self. The diabolical self is the worst of the two. That is why a cold, self-righteous prig. Wow, okay. Who goes regularly to church may be far nearer to hell than a prostitute. But of course, it's better to be neither. Just think about that. Just don't do either one, yeah.
And he ended his radio program with that. Can you imagine listening to this, and the last
And
thing
the-
he said that night was, but of course it's better to be not the one.
And then the theme music. You go, what? And they couldn't back it up. Yeah, that would have grabbed them.
Thank God that this station got a lot of calls.
Yeah, I bet they did. From what it sounds like, people were like lined up. They knew what time this thing was coming on, and they're ready to take notes, and they're listening. Even the troops who could get the BBC were listening to this. It's kind of these topics. Shoot. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Can you just see that big old radio thing sitting in the living room? They're getting ready to listen to this.
Time to go to bed, kids.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Well, Christian marriage, we got that one to look at as well. We'll go in a different direction. And this is, Tom, like you were talking about, I do not particularly want to deal with marriage because, I've never been married. Get into it anyway. And he's talking about the one flesh thing and how all of that aspect of the Christian life works, and how on 105, the Christian attitude of eating. It means that you must not isolate that pleasure, try to get it by yourself or by itself, any more than you ought to try to get the pleasures of taste without swallowing, digesting by chewing things and spitting them out again. Okay. So we're going to deal, there's a number of things in here I'm sure you're ready to check out. But let's do this. If we have a marriage, we got two people, and we're becoming one, because that's the whole end, the illustration that the Lord gives us from the get-go. Two people becoming one. So the sexual process is part of that illustration. It's part of the natural design that God's put into this whole mixture, so that we get a better idea of the one flesh situation and the coming together of the two. You realize that when we reproduce, there's this whole thing of two parts, two DNAs, two things are coming together in one, creating a zygote. Doesn't that look like the illustration in the book for the zygote thing? I thought, you know what? He knew what he was doing from the get-go. That was there. That picture is there. The science is there. The illustration is there. It's also the illustration of our connection with the Lord. The church is the oneness with God, the oneness with Christ. Where the intimacy is so tight, so close, or ought to be, that all of these things are creating something new. They reproduce something so new it brings life. So the whole, I know, it's weird. It wasn't in the book. It just came to mind. That whole picture of what in the world he's doing is so cool. But that oneness, I'm going to do this with, how can I do that? God's design. He's got this plan. So here's the oneness side over here. And in that, there is faith and I'll add that on there. Oneness and faith or faithfulness that happens in marriage, a commitment that's involved. There is a contract when you get married. And that's going to be the legal part of this. And then we'll go with social side of this. And it comes from, every different kind of society is for marriage. This one is more of a covenant. When he starts dealing with this, Cass and I talked about this morning too. The civil side of this is different from the God's design side of this, and he makes a point of saying, you don't want Islamic rules put on everybody, and the Christian rules, that's hardly fair to lay on everybody. They're not committed to Christ, for one. They don't have the power of the Spirit to help them live life that's available. They're not holding on to the truth of Scripture, so they don't have that to guide them. And then we put rules on them that they are incapable of understanding or keeping. So it's a whole different deal. And I've just gone through a whole thing on Old Testament, New Testament marriages just in this last week about the differences in contract and what was going on in Deuteronomy and the level of what God was looking at when he was setting this up is really incredible. And it makes a whole lot more sense. We don't have time for all of it obviously to get into, besides we're going from Lewis's perspective. But the difference in approaching this relationship as this kind of bond, and faith is part of that. Faithfulness to God, faith in God, faith in one another, because believing partners, faithfulness to each other, saying, yes, we are in this together. That's a covenant. The contract and the commitment is what carries you over, which he gets to and when he's covering this as well. It gets to the commitment is the thing. Love, you may feel love and then the love fades, that feeling fades, but the commitment keeps you going. So and you remember that part. So that's part of what he's talking about. When it gets to the social side of this, they don't have the spiritual power, they don't have the spiritual perspective to carry this on. But the people are bonded. They start with love, and that feeling may fade. And the thing that holds them together is a contract, because they've made a contract in court with a judge, or maybe sometimes they get married in church. But all it really means to them is it's a contract. I will share this part though from my little trip through the Old Testament on this. So this guy was explaining some of the laws that applied to in the old days. And he said, so what if two people are just living together and they don't want to have a social civil arrangement. They don't want God. So they're just saying, no, we're just going to get together, but there's no contract. So this is a contractless relationship, which is popular, just the live together version of this. He said the Old Testament has a word for that. You own nothing. You have no legal right to anything. Yeah, you can do it. And that's what you get. You go, you know what? Holy moly, it's been right there in the book all this time. Okay, that had nothing to do with Lewis. All right, back to the book. Just an aside.
Can I ask a question? In the Old Testament of concubines, we read about them all the time, and they would just write it as a fact. Was there something that said you were their concubine, or did just people like now you understand, they're, male or female, but so it's not written anywhere, it was just a fact of knowledge that people knew they were getting together to have sex and be
Yeah,
together.
they may have written it too. I don't know. One of the things that this guy does talk about, because he's talking about the Deuteronomy 24, the certificate of divorce Moses said they were supposed to have. He said when these women got married, there was a contract, and it was written, and there were certain agreements. It's in the scriptures. The husband owes this, the wife owes this. And if you don't fulfill your part of that, either party, you've broken the contract. You violated faithfulness. You've broken faith. You are not semper fi. So the whole thing falls apart. So with that, then you could have a divorce, and it's not just the one thing that we typically think about. It's a violation of any of these contractual agreements. So they had a certain amount of money. They could see their kids. If a concubine violated anything, it is like when Abraham tells Hagar, go to Egypt. You can take your kid, which is, they didn't always get to do that. So they have no rights and no recourse. It's just, There's a friend of family over in Claremore. They were together 20-some years, had kids, a ranch, horses, did rodeos. They were the hip, cool couple, did all that. She's a concubine. And one day he woke up in the morning and said, you know, that's enough of that. See ya. She gets no horse trailer. She gets no horse. She has no right. I mean, the kids are hers because of our laws, but gone. But they were so clever in letting everyone know, yeah, we just don't believe in the thing of marriage, that whole contract thing. And you go, wow, how'd that work for you? And it's all over the place these days. You put that label in their t-shirt, you know, have them wear that shirt. Well, may want to rethink it.
If I may ask, a lot of times, the concubines' children could be their slaves. I mean, they weren't treated like kids, were they? Or they
Not
were-
always. They could be, yeah. And they could do like Abraham. He could have just kept the kid and said, you go.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because he has the right to the kid, not in that system. And to anything else. But yeah, there may have been something written, but for the marriage one, they kept a copy of it that in one account, it's talking about when the guys would go off to war, they would write out a certificate of divorce for the woman, for their wives, in case they got killed. So if anything happened, it says you have the right to marry whoever you want. According to the rabbis, that's the basic info that has to be on there. And then they carry that with them. When at Masada, there was in the remains, they found a woman there, and they left everything to go up there. The Romans are coming. This is the last stand. And the thing they found with her was her certificate of marriage, because there was nothing more important for a woman in that day to carry that or the certificate of divorce so they could get another to get married. So that's a big deal. This whole thing was a big deal. The contract thing was a big deal. But in God's design, it's about the oneness, it's about the relationship, it's about the faithfulness, it's about the commitment. This all fits there too, because you know, we're human beings and we're really bad about following through on stuff, so contracts fit in there.
So, part of the oneness, though, is the sexual,
Yes.
intimacy. And so many couples that are doing that just in dating, not even in living together. I mean, what happens? How does the human heart and mind deal with that when you have oneness with so many? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the problem. That grows and grows and grows.
I think this line in here kind of addresses that. It says, the monstrosity of sexual intercourse outside marriage is that those who indulge in it are trying to isolate one kind of union, the sexual, from all the other kinds of union which was intended to go along with it and make up the total, right? We're tricking ourselves when we do that.
Yeah.
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 It's a monstrosity.
is a good word for it,
Yeah. Yeah. And it just keeps growing.
We're just tricking ourselves.
Yeah.
A lot of selfishness, I'd say.
It is a lot of selfishness. Yeah.
Well, and, a lot of this is, of course, this is the newer terms, but helping us with the whole idea of boundaries and how good boundaries are,
Yeah.
even in our sexuality, finding some boundaries. It's not with everyone all the time. There are boundaries for it that keep it really good and safe and,
Yeah. And like you said, if you have the urge, you just don't run around having sex with everybody. You also just don't go eat all the cake that exists in the world. I mean, it's because you have an urge. You just go, come on. But we don't put it in that framework when we're thinking about it. But yeah, we need boundaries. And he gives them to us. I do like separating this one from that one that he does in here, just because to enforce in some way of demeaning or looking down or being judgmental, condemning on people who have no idea about this. They're functioning probably not even half of that, but just the sexual side. And you just go, okay, so they're running amok. What they need is light. They need to know that there's a better way, that the boundaries do work, that there's real love available, and it's not just in running from place to place and looking for love in all the wrong places and all the stuff that unfolds, because there are plenty of songs, at least on my country western station that I listen to, that cover that. So, I don't know. I think he does a good job of explaining that, but to enforce this on a group that has no idea is really unfair. Our idea is to live this out so well that it shines. And if we don't screw this up, actually be faithful, live in oneness, allow the reality of the living God to live in us and through our relationship, we are representing Christ and his church on earth, letting other people see there's something better. And if we can't do that, if we don't do that, we're just like them. And then to ever come together in a Christian group and say, well, those guys, look how they're living. And you go, how have we proven that walking with God makes a difference and our marriage is better and our communication and our love and what's flowing out of us? But he does say, if you blow it, repent, ask for forgiveness, get up, try again. Because the goal is to make this better. I think that's really is a goal. Didn't that one get you, though? It's like, what the heck? The modern day concubine. Without the commitment, it just is passing. It's a feeling. It's whatever the moment. And so people are looking for that feeling over and over again, so they change partners, either dating or concubine version or marriages. Just this isn't working, so I'm going to go do that. There are legit things that break down the covenant and the commitment, and that's why it's in Scripture that way. But a lot of times it's just, I lost my feeling, so now I'm going to go chase it somewhere. And he's saying that's not it. It's a deep unity, maintained by the will and do a lot of work. No, it's awesome. It's not work at all. Just deliberately make that commitment, follow through. They can have this love for each other even at those moments when they do not like each other. As you love yourself even when you do not like yourself. They can retain this love even when each would easily, if they allowed themselves, be in love with someone else. Being in love first moved them to promise fidelity. That's faithfulness. This quieter love enables them to keep the promise. It is on this love that the engine of marriage is run. Being in love was the explosion that started it. That's good. So yeah, we need that. I like the explosion part. Yeah, it gets us rolling. But this other, the contract gives us something to work with, and rarely do people spend a whole lot of time thinking through that whole area. But let's see what else. What else stands out to you in there?
I like a funny line.
Okay, I like these two.
I like the one where he's talking about justice, and when we get married, that if we're making a vow, we're making a promise, and that if we get married knowing that we're not going to keep that promise, we're just going to church and saying, oh yeah, we're going to make this promise. He says that people that do that should just live together because they're in jeopardy when they get married and they do that. But one fault is, sorry, here, let me back up here a minute. It is true that by living together without marriage, they will be guilty in Christian eyes of fornication. But one fault is not mended by adding another. Unchastity is not improved by adding perjury.
Adding perjury.
Right.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Yes, I love his dry British humor.
It's peppered through here. It's pretty fun.
And true.
So true.
I think this sentence really stood out to me. Just in the paragraph above that, he says, well, if, as I think, it is not like all our other impulses, that's the sexual impulse, but it is morbidly inflamed, then we should be especially careful not to let it lead us into dishonesty. That's right on.
Really good. Yeah. Morbidly inflamed.
We should be extra careful with that thing,
Mhm.
'cause it's a beast.
Yeah. Yep. And it is applauded by the society and presented at every turn, so it's a big thing. In our day, it has been all along, but definitely around us. If you decide to make thrills your regular diet and try to prolong them artificially, they will all get weaker and weaker and fewer, and you will be a bored, disillusioned old man for the rest of your life. I love his encouraging lines in here. Just like, holy moly. All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we didn't get to we got enough time for this. The headship thing. We kind of did that before.
I appreciated the end of that, why it should be the man, because women tend to be the mama bears.
That is the most unique reason I have ever heard of.
It's so right though, ain't it? Because we're supposed to defend to the outside, you know?
I thought it was a very unique take and kind of
I like it.
kind of interesting.
I'm there.
I like it.
Because I deal with students, and I would rather deal with the dad than the mother, you know, because mama bear their baby don't do nothing wrong. Dad's like, well, now, let's take another look at this.
Use the camera so
You
it's
know.
different, you know?
So,
I like it.
Well, and sadly, often, I hate this tendency and I hope it changes, but often we would much prefer work for a man than a woman. Both men and, and I don't know what that is. It's not always true, but,
Well,
and
it
I don't know what that
depends.
is.
It depends on the woman and the man. Having worked a whole lot of years and had both women and men
Mhm.
bosses,
Mhm.
I have had brilliant women bosses.
Yes, yes.
And brilliant men.
Yes.
And I've had the worst in both as
Both.
well.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, Cass, I think, this is a whole different conversation, but just quickly, some of the things I think that happen with women is that when they use power, they're trying to use it in the same way men do, or there's just a way that they do that doesn't work.
Doesn't fit,
And
yeah.
unless they figure that out, then they're not very good bosses at all.
True.
Yeah, that's good. It is true. I'm suspecting at the time that these things are put together, and now I forgot where that was, but he said that the husband and wife can decide which part, who can run this thing or that thing. So I think, yeah, you make that decision. On the cultural thing, okay, let's go back to the concubine era. And you go, okay, so things were such that at the time of the writing of Scripture, the whole time. Well, barely past the time that he wrote in the 40s, women didn't own property. Women didn't vote. Women had no legal rights. So why would you put someone who has no legal standing in charge of the family to make decisions about the business or the house or what land, or even practically you just can't because of the system? That changed, but even that was pretty freshly new in the 40s. I mean, what, 20 years? They, that's,
But even in the 40s, Frankie, a married woman could not go and open her own bank account.
oh, okay.
That was
See?
still, that was not possible. And I know this from my grandmother Worthington.
She couldn't.
She could not. And
So I'm thinking it's very practical. It
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily you're less than. It just, you can't help the family if we gotta, yeah. And until that changes, which it, it's different now. We can have, do it all, but that's a whole new day. But I think what he said about, well, decide, y'all talk. You still have to come down. Somebody has to have a final vote here, because it's just two people. So I think it's still workable. But I just thought I'd throw out that cultural thing from the years past. You can't have the kindergarten make the call on how you're going to do everything just because the kindergartner is cute. You go, they have no rights. They can't drink or drive. I mean, there's they're wonderful, but no. So we can't, it just made it impossible. Hands are tied.
So I'm not trying to trap you into making a point here, but is it a biblical point that the man has to be the one in our culture too? I mean, is this a truth?
No, I don't think practically that's true. I think you still need leadership. I think there are, by the time you get to 1 Corinthians 7, there's the woman has become a Christian, the man hasn't. So do you allow the guy who's worshiping Moloch to control the family? There's just a whole lot of other things that are a factor in that as well. And I think the principle stands. I think it's just not a rigid,
Marriage exists,
yes.
not even in a Christian marriage necessarily.
Yeah, for outside,
I'm sorry,
we
I'm
have
just trying to
nothing.
make you give me some solid thing here.
No, I think it's still like a relevant principle. And the mama bear thing, and I think those are relevant too. But I think the whole, let's talk about what are you good, if you're better,
But
let's
if it
make some
comes down
decisions.
to it in
To a
Christian
vote.
marriage, do you think the man vote wins?
I
If
think-
you just can't agree on it? Or
Yeah,
not,
and-
you don't wanna
and-
say for sure. I don't know.
No, because I do. If you got a man who's walking with God and a woman who's apply those verses and say, woman, you are subject to me. Nothing but hell on earth. And that's happened way too often, and I am not in favor.
That's the culture that the prophet had back in the day. Men did not even respect women. They thought that they were there strictly for education, and they had no regard for them today. And so God's design.
those men still live today.
Well, no, I don't think so. I think God's design was not really considered back in those days. And today, I hope, and it's in our marriage, there has to be mutual respect, capable of handling things than I am, and I am in some cases better at handling things than she is. So that culture, when did that cultural change come about? Because today, I hope that we are more in God's design, because I don't.
Part here is God's not part of it. God's design is he is at the top of this thing, regardless of how we get along. If he's not at the top, it's not God's design. So, yeah, in the culture and the world around us, still, it's warped. Even for some of them, it's, I'm just going to let the woman run it. Well, that's not right either. Where'd your backbone go? Did you hear from God There are other words that come to mind, but I'm not saying those. Okay, so God's design, yeah, but I think we need more of that. It's not in the culture. The culture has dumped this, and the Christian culture dumped that too. And they went with what the culture was around them in Europe or Middle East or wherever they were. They bought more of this and they bought this. This is countercultural. But it is so cool. Did you like it? Move us in the right direction. But the culture back then limited women, so yeah, the guys had to jump in there. And I think today, if we're walking with God, I think men and women, this thing can just take off. Better than SpaceX. I think we can do more. But we have changed, you're right, Tom, in the whole, the idea of women being less than in the whole of culture that's changed, that's a huge step. Let's see. Your kid gets bit by the dog. Yeah, she's going after him. Oh, okay. We've hit that time. Father, thank you. Thank you for allowing us some time to look into these topics, and thank you for making things available to us to wrestle with them and reflect on them. Thanks for the time we've had together this morning, and as we go into the service and the rest of this day, that we would honor you with our conversation, our thoughts, and all our activities. In Jesus' name.